Thank you for joining our session today. We are just thrilled to be here at this siberX event. Big shout out to the siberX team who's done such an amazing job. My name is Trish Trenter. I'm Director of Recruitment and Partnerships for Contact North, getting close to 10 years. And we're going to begin our discussion very shortly on secure student information systems and the power of blockchain technologies. Before introducing my esteemed colleagues, though, with their plethora of expertise, I wanted to take an opportunity to enlighten you with a few points about a shared service for Ontarians that has been around since 1986, funded by the provincial government. In those 34 years, Contact North has become the backbone of online learning in Ontario. The needs of this pandemic and the shift to online learning that we're experiencing is something we have been supporting for many years throughout 1,300 communities in the province of Ontario. We support 3 different areas. So we support the colleges, the universities, 24 colleges, 22 universities, 250 literacy and training partners, as well as local providers. We have generated annually over 65,000 registrations across the province of Ontario by reaching out within our communities. Our hotline has been significantly busy with this pandemic in the fact that they've been answering a lot of calls, a lot of interest from international who can't cross our borders right now. And our job is to connect them with our institutions. Secondly, we work for Ontarians. We have over 116 centres across the province. We are virtual right now. We're slowly opening up in a very safe way. And what we're doing there is working with people, engaging them in online learning, reaching out, connecting their pathways, connecting them with institutions, and really equipping them, if you look at employees as well, in the field of online education. What are the new skills that you need? How do you connect with that access? And lastly, which brings us to our talk today, we have a website called teachonline.ca, and there we connect institution, faculty, and corporate trainers with trends and resources to be able to adapt in this growing online world. And now I'm going to move into introducing our colleagues, and that's how I'm making the connection. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Stephen Murgatroyd. I have had the chance to know him for some time now, and he's our Chief Innovation Officer as well as many other things. But if you've ever had a chance to see him speak at a conference or read one of his papers, he has one of the most amazing personalities. His incredible expertise is from having worked extensively in open and distance education since 1972. I'm going to quietly mention that I was 2 years old when he started. He has worked with Open University UK, Athabasca University Canada in corporate training and consulting with Axia Net Media, as a consultant to Open Polytechnique of New Zealand, Commonwealth Learning, Hamdan bin Mohammed, Smart University of Dubai, Middlesex University UK, and many more. He has advised governments on educational policy in Chile, Paraguay, United Arab Emirates, Australia, and New Zealand. He most recently has been advising the New Zealand Open Polytechnique on its transformation agenda. And in the UAE, he's working with both the Ministry of Possibilities, I'll have to ask him about that, and the Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research on the future of technology-enabled learning, especially focusing on smart skills, the role of AI, and augmented virtual reality in re-imaging learning. So just wanted you to know all that background as we approach this subject. Secondly, one of my newer colleagues, Dan Giurescu, CEO, president, and founder of erraHub. I've just recently met Dan, but I can already see that passion, how he wants to make change, the different things that he wants to do. Dan thrives on the challenge of commercializing new concepts, guiding teams, and inspiring action by creating an environment where taking risks in pursuit of success is encouraged. We're seeing that shift in our society and with our institutions right now. Prior to erraHub, Dan leveraged his industry and regulatory knowledge, financial acumen, and technology expertise to co-found Caledonia Solutions, a supply chain software for the dangerous goods industry, moving the industry away from paper and into digital innovation. Community-focused, Dan supports numerous local charities and the growth of tech in Canada through A100, IBM District Ventures, TEC Canada, Blockchain Advisory, and as a board member for Athabasca University Leadership Advisory Council. So after setting the stage with those introductions, I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues who have quite a bit to share with you today. Stephen, I'd like to start with you if you could discuss secure student information systems, and I'd like you to touch on security, privacy, integrity, cost, and efficiency.
Thanks, Trish. Well, this is a big topic. I just wanted to get us all focused. So in the month of June, 92 quite distinct incidents occurred involving round about 7 billion records being stolen from secure databases, so-called secure databases. Isn't that a magic word? Secure databases, meaning that anybody can get at them. Some of these terrifically secure databases included the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, who managed to lose 329,000 records. Marriott International, great hotels, 5.2 million records gone there. Adobe, 7.5 million records. I could go on. Now, these are not universities or colleges, because obviously they're going to be really secure. Not really. Round about 20% of all colleges and universities in Canada are hacked each year. A team of ethical hackers managed to crack open 50 sets of university student information systems in less than 2 hours. So we have insecure information systems, but that's not my big problem. I mean, I think that's big enough to worry about. My big problem is we also have reasonably pointless information systems. We collect so much data, so much information from our students and our faculty and our colleagues and our suppliers, and we make very little effective use of that information. In fact, I've just been teaching at the University of Toronto and at the University of Alberta, and our student record information system is full of completely useless information to me as an instructor, but even worse, information that doesn't really do very much for better decision-making, faster decision-making, smarter decision-making. And I think part of the problem is we collect information in case we might need it. I think also we're using very antiquated frameworks for our understanding of what data and information is. And we actually think as institutional members, like universities and colleges, that we own this data. And somehow students have no right to access their data, even though they can probably access it at any time just by talking to a friendly ethical hacker. So how can we reimagine the challenge of these data? They're vulnerable to attack. They're not being used powerfully for analytics. They're not being used for better decision-making. They're not being used to improve instructional design or learning. And it's difficult to get information out if you happen to be a student. Just try, in this moment of COVID-19, to get a brand new transcript issued to you like that. Best of luck. So I think there's some real challenges with how we think about data, how we understand it. Now, I think the security issue preoccupies a lot of our colleges, colleagues in the IT sectors of colleges and universities, and so it should. If we can lose 20 million records in our university system in a single week, which is what happened in February of this year, if we can see breaches of our security system or entire websites cloned by somebody to use the back-end information from those websites to collect money for fraudulent purposes, then I think security is a big issue. But my big issue is, how are we using data? How are we giving people rights over their own information? Who owns this data? Can we use it smartly? So I think it's about time we stopped doing a lot of things we're doing and started again. I think it's time for us to rethink the purposes and value of data as a source for better decision making. I think it's time for us to rethink who owns data and how we manage that data and access to that data. And it's time for us to rethink security. And I know some of our colleagues in the world of IT in colleges and universities are doing precisely that. So my colleagues in New Zealand, for example, are using Microsoft's Power BI to really do fantastic things with the data they've got. But what they discovered when they started to use AI-enabled analytics was they had a load of information they didn't need, and they didn't have the information they actually needed to make better decisions. So they went back to the drawing board and are reimagining data. Now, I think there are some really big opportunities in this rethinking. So I'm going to stop there, Trish, and let you pick this up from here.
Sure. So as you've mentioned, there's lots of different challenges. And Dan, what I've known from you so far in the short time I've known you is that you want to solve problems. Your organization and your company and your thought is all about change and finding solutions. So can you walk us through a little bit about how you feel the movement to blockchain in education and kind of outline some of the plans that you feel are solutions for this problem?
Thanks, Trish, for that. And Stephen, that was incredibly passionate. So I think it's going to be hard for me to follow that component. So a few things. One, my background is in building network-based solutions, meaning single source of truth, document management systems, where multiple parties can access a single source of truth document, technically. So that led me over the last 10, 15 years of building solutions such as into looking at what is the next evolution of the technology. And this is where really specifically private blockchain technology came to be. So for those of you that might not necessarily be very familiar with blockchain technology itself, a quick user guide is anything that's called a public blockchain technology enablement means that a cryptocurrency has to be exchanged for a transaction to be completed, while a private blockchain technology deployment is really for an invite only. It's really enabled by the people that want to be a part of it and are being asked to be a part of it. So that really drove us into the world of, well, what else can you do with this technology when it comes down to people and personal records? And as Stephen knows very well, we've moved very fast, very quickly in the world of bringing new regulatory policies to life, like GDPR, California-based laws, Privacy Information Act in Canada, that's now following with other subsets of data that are really to be held private and owned by the individual. And today, there is no way for us to ultimately say this data is this person's information, and therefore nobody should have access to it except that individual. So the power of blockchain technology has been incredible when it comes down to truly ensuring that I own my data, I share it with who I want to, and then at the end of that transaction, I can revoke that data back. And this is leading us into something quite incredible that's actually happening in Canada, which is, if some of you have followed or might not have followed, it's called the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. And we're really starting to look at other groups outside of Canada, such as the United Emirates. We're seeing what groups like Gibraltar and other major global powers are really doing around management of personal data through blockchain technology. And why that's really critical is because it creates a single source of truth for a single person to manage their own records and information. And Stephen is right. Who are we as universities to manage somebody's records on behalf of them and hold them hostage to that record? Because really, that record is their record. And with new Privacy Information Acts that are being brought to the table, we have to be very careful with when an individual can come back and say, I no longer want you to have access to that record. Maybe you could keep it for 5 or 7 years for your own personal financial management and audit, but post that, why do you need to have it? So there's a lot of things that are now going to start changing and helping us move towards a new value of data. And I keep referencing Stephen because he made some really incredible points, which is, why do you need that data? I mean, just because you can show that 600,000 people graduated with this kind of a degree, it's like, so what? what's the value of that data? And how are you going to use it to make something of it? So are you going to be using it to attract new students? Are you going to be using it for new marketing? What's the purpose of it? And what's really interesting is when you start looking at blockchain technology and private blockchain, it would be really powerful for people to start following groups like CompTIA, right, which are one of the largest global instructors in and around technology, from IBM's technology, Amazon's, Google's, and everybody else's. And almost every CIO and CTO would have gone at some point in time to a CompTIA training. I believe, Trish, the number is something like 14 million online courses being provided by CompTIA every single year. That's a significant number of tech and technological individuals following that environment. And they've been creating baselines for how do you deploy blockchain? Where do you deploy it? What's the value proposition? How do you describe that back to your business to say, this is why you want to invest in the technology of the future? And what it is, and how do you create, at the end of the day, what we call future, how do I say this properly so I don't butcher it, but it's creating new business models that we just can't even imagine today. Because the business model of having immutable, irrefutable, and tangible data that has the highest assurance of audit, what can that do for the organization? Nobody really knows until you truly get into it and you start finding a way to apply it. So the challenge comes with the misconception a lot of the times around blockchain, because fortunately or unfortunately, some of the big global players have made it a very, very sounding expensive technology, while truly it really isn't. It's just another technology deployment. So when people talk about the cost of deployment of new technology, it's like, oh, it's too much. Well, it doesn't have to be that much. And the part that we're not looking at is, with a new technology like this, what is the cost avoidance that we're going to be providing? And back to Stephen's last point around the cybersecurity component of the hacking and even on the white hacker component, really we're in an environment where we can say, what is the cost of doing nothing? And can we afford to do nothing when we're in a position where how many of our universities have been held hostage for ransomware, right? How many universities, like Stephen said, have been now mirrored, and others are drawing in the capital from what somebody else should have been receiving? And then ultimately, how do you build trust back to your funders of your organization to let them know that the moment that they actually handed over that capital to you, and some of these universities are raising incredible money. I mean, recently we just had a university announce $1.4 billion in capital raise for their advancements. So how do I trust you as a donor that you are going to be maintaining that information properly? So to us, we're looking at the current and future state of the workforce, really enabling an individual to have information at their fingertips and giving them the opportunity to manage that information by themselves, as the gig economy workforce is now starting to take over. Some of the most recent numbers I've seen in the US, 59 million people in the US are considered gig economy workforces, and just over 3.5 million in Canada, which is about to go quite high post-COVID. So how do you manage an environment where people need to have access to their data now in real time? It has to be trustworthy so they can then share it with their employer at that point in time to provide them the rapid access to that new job, technically. So are we becoming a bottleneck as the universities and colleges by holding people hostage to that data when we shouldn't, because we have no reason to?
Dan, could I ask a question? So as we're looking at this, you're talking about the universities and the colleges, and you're talking about trust. I think the trust extends down as well to the students. So we work, Contact North is working with students in those courses and programs, and they have to believe in that online education. Just recently, a personal experience, my son is in the military, RMC, unfortunately, their systems were down. This is the first time in his life he did online learning, and that was a little bit hard because he's military, more hands-on, right? When the course went down, all the communication went down. It took a while to get back up, and he actually lost a bit of interest. We were trying to prod him, but not, he's old enough now, he has to do this on his own. So I would like to ask both of you, and Stephen, I know you'll have an opinion on this. How do you, number one, continue to not interrupt services by that distress, but more importantly, how do you shift colleges and universities across Canada into the blockchain? This is a huge transformation. This is unprecedented in some areas. Can you share a little bit about how we make that move? And Dan, you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, I'll just say that there aren't that many adoptions in Canada, though there's a network of universities in Europe led by the Open University UK that are using blockchain both for exactly the purposes that Dan is outlining in terms of secure transaction information, securing the credit history of a particular student, being able to go into that blockchain and say, well, yes, but we told you this credit, this credential only lasted for 3 years, so now it's gone. So managing stale dating. So there's just a small number of institutions around the world. And in Canada, if I'm right, I think SAIT's the only one that has a version of blockchain together with Bow Valley College, both in Calgary, which is, funny enough, where Dan is. I wonder if that's anything to do with why that's happened. But I think that technology is never a solution, people are. And Peter Drucker, who I managed to work with a couple of years before he died, used to say that, look, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, culture eats technology for lunch. And I think that what we need to think about is what's the problem we're trying to solve? And I think that problem is data integrity, analytics, the best use of data for better decisions, and the integrity of the student information and who owns that information. If those are the issues, then blockchain's a solution. And a small number of institutions in Europe, in Asia, and in North America are beginning to realize it. But it's a heck of a journey because IT managers and the leadership of these organizations have to give up comfort with risk. And that's never an easy thing to do. But I guess Dan has some experience of trying to make this happen. So what's it like on the other end, Dan, of actually making it happen?
It's a lot of what you just said. It's about the creating of the comfort, right? And allowing people to understand that it's not, first of all, it's a journey, right? You're all embarking on a journey. You're all going down a journey of what is that future state going to look like? And you are truly designing it as you go along. And people are very uncomfortable with that because we're used to the traditional and typical models of show me the business case of the business plan, show me the ROI, and then I'll tell you whether I'll give you budget to do it. And then show me that there's going to be a payback in whatever the institute's value proposition is, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the pain threshold will be. But the reality is that when you're deploying new and emerging technology, it's a journey for everybody. And you get some bumps and some hiccups, but you cross the T's and dot the I's, and you keep moving forward. And I agree with Stephen. At the end of the day, it's about culture, it's about strategy, and it's about the ability to know that you'll trust the team that's going to deploy the right way. And Trish, to your example of your son, I'll draw a parallel example to that, which is there's a separate university that we've been in discussions with that is looking at blockchain technology, and specifically from our platform, to say, how can we actually store at the end of each course, at the end of each day's course, how do we store the PowerPoint or the PDF that was presented to the students? And this is for their medical faculty staff to say, in a future state, if anybody comes back and actually sues the faculty and the professors because they said, well, no, you taught me this, and then I did an error in my practice, you can actually go back and say, sorry, you cannot actually bring that kind of a claim against me. Now, what happens if you're looking at, institutes that are more polytechnic, where you teach somebody something that could potentially lead to a more fatal environment where they might cut off a finger or might be exposed to a chemical reaction somewhere, and they'll say, well, no, that's what I learned in school. And it's like, well, no, I can prove to you that we never taught you during the period that you were in that classroom, we never taught you this. So can you imagine what happens? Again, it creates a new business model that we didn't anticipate, but it's all for a future state avoidance of the current situations. And that's where technology becomes incredibly powerful when we start looking at the value of the why. And now it holds both people accountable for being truthful and ethical about how they're putting each other at in that compliant, non-compliant environment.
And
Trish, I think the other thing to bear in mind, Trish, is this, that some of the reasons we don't have things like, can I start the course now, right now, this afternoon, 4 o'clock? I've got another hour, I can get going. Why don't we do that? Well, because Banner, one of the standard information systems used by universities and colleges, doesn't permit instant recognition of a student. They can't simply register when they want, finish when they want, and yet that's what the system should be doing. So we have this weird situation where our information technology infrastructure, in particular, our student registration information systems, prevent innovation. Blockchain is much more responsive to the next thing we want to do. And so one of the things that I think Dan's playing with in some of his implementations is opening up opportunities for the next thing, for innovation. What our current information systems do in our universities and colleges is totally inhibit that from happening.
Well, and Stephen, I'll add one component to that. And sorry, Trish, I felt like I really cut you off, and I
No, go ahead.
Mid-sentence on that one. Well, and Stephen is 100% correct, because I mean, think about what's happening with COVID-19. Everybody's working from home, right? Many organizations globally are saying, I'm not sending our people back for a year, 2 years, even back into the offices. So why shouldn't I have access to an anywhere, anytime ability to take a course that I need for the bettering of my job? So if I've presented myself somewhere, and take your typical KYC process, right? Like the know your client or know your customer process that a bank does or anybody else does. How can I open up an account with, my cell phone provider over the phone, and they'll ask me some simple questions about who I am, but yet I can't do the same thing in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with a student record management system? Like, what is that extra step of information that you really need that badly? Then outside of my cellular provider and my, I don't know, my NMAX in my case, for those of you that are in Canada, right? Like my electricity provider. Why, like, what is it that's making this so special that I have to take so many extra KYC processes in place? Like, you're imparting knowledge on me, but for something that I'm paying for. So technically, it feels like a pretty good barter to me of you wanting to impart your knowledge on me pretty quickly, so you can get me out and get the next person in.
Absolutely. And if I look at, in my role as director, I am liaison for 12 colleges and universities. And in talking with each one of them, they're moving as hard as they can, as lean as they can. They're looking, they would love in a minute, like Dr. Murgatroyd said, to be able to go, okay, you're registered, you want to pay, you're good, let's go, let's get you on. I know that they want to do that. So is it awareness? Is it for you, Dan, in offering this service, and for you, Stephen, in what you've seen, is it, we know they want to move. We know that institutions are bricks and mortar. It takes a little bit more to get going, but they're working very hard. They want to see change. What is the next step? Is it awareness? What do you do?
So I'll give you an example. So my colleagues at the Smart University in Dubai spent 2 years talking about creating a future skills center where they would teach on demand in partnership with an intelligent tutor that was AI enabled. And I got fed up with this conversation. I was coaching this team, and I said, will you ever actually do anything, or are we just flying me in just to be able to shop at the mall? So I sat down with a team of 3 people I trusted, and we created this thing over a weekend in November of last year. When COVID hit, they have registered 1.8 million people in one course which is how to get your courses online in 24 hours. And it's now available in 6 languages. And guess what the engine is at the back end of that? It's a blockchain engine. Guess what the substance of that opportunity is? Upselling. This is a free course. That's why there's so many people on it. But I said, make it free and then sell them all the other micro credentials you want to create. So now they have 85,000 micro credential students paying them money.
Wow.
And what did this cost? Nothing much at all. Dan's point, it's not as if we're talking money. We're actually talking process re-engineering. We're actually talking culture change. And that's why I think there's a hesitancy. Universities and colleges are creative and slow. And what this work is that Dan's been doing is fast and smart. Now, if we have creative, innovative, fast and smart, that's not a definition of a university or a college. It needs to be, because that's what they're going to have to do to keep going, given where we are right now with COVID-19.
Dan, do you want to?
And Stephen, oh my God, sorry.
No,
so two things on this. So the first component is, we're talking about the future state of stacked credentials, right? Doesn't matter where you go in the world, if you're recognized as one unit or one identity, regardless of which network you get it from, meaning a blockchain network or a non-blockchain network or a student record management system, once it hits your digital wallet, which is what we ended up building, is this concept of a digital wallet where individuals can stack everything that they've learned and they've gained as their own. The sharing and revoking of that afterwards is incredible how powerful it can be when also the university gets a net new, or I should say post-secondary or any educational institute, gets something net new that they've never had in their life before. The ability to revoke somebody's record or to suspend it in case of a bad action because it was a bad actor, or the ability to actually take something back if it expired. And imagine if you're in a world where there's a single source of truth document, meaning that what you see is what I see, and nobody else can see anything different than what we all see. Imagine how powerful that is when I can say, oh, your credit is expiring in 30 days from now or 60 days from now. I've notified you 3 times through your network. I know you've received them because I can see on the other side that you've got like a send receive, open notification. I've booked you for a renewal of your course. So think about that as a client retention and regenerating revenue back on the same process. That's key. That's a new business model. But then if you don't do it, I can just click expired. And everybody you've shared this with sees an expired certificate. This does not exist in traditional systems that have been built today. So is this an actual benefit to the university or to the post-secondaries? 100%. Because you're now creating a return client with full trust that they will most likely come back to you because that's where they learned it from, and they know the way that you teach. They know that's the way that they like to learn. It's creating a new bond. You're actually building yourself a future state market that doesn't exist today.
Well, plus, if you listen to the head of Twitter, who said on Monday of this week that in the IT world, the shelf life of skills is between 2 and 3 years. So if we build on Dan's idea, I am so old, my blood type has been discontinued, but I learned coding. I could show you a certificate that I can code, but I can code in Fortran 4. Now, nobody in this room is old enough to remember what Fortran 4 is, but it's kind of like medieval coding. We used to use it in the Battle of Hastings planning. But it's a useless piece of skill, and it should be revoked as a piece of skill because it's not usable. There's nowhere I can use that right now. In my own profession, I'm a psychologist by profession. I am required by my professional body to recertify certain skills periodically. Otherwise, my license to practice is disappearing. But there's no way they can actually trace whether I've done that or not. They trust me to say, absolutely, I've done this. Of course I've done this. Don't be silly. But actually, it's very silly. There's no evidence that I've done any of this at any stage in my professional career other than my word for it. Now, I have, but I needn't. And that's Dan's point, that we could verify my claim that, yes, I did attend this session. Yes, I did complete the activities that required of that session. Yes, I can be recertified.
Well, I'll give you one final example on my end, which is a live example. And this is how we ended up teaching blockchain for an executive course at a local university. I walked into the dean's office and I sat in his chair with his executive assistant's permission. I sat in his chair and I said, I am the new dean of this business school. When he walked in and he said, okay, Dan, thank you. I appreciate the giggle. What do you mean? And I said, well, I actually changed this on LinkedIn. I've shared it with my 2,000, 3,000 plus contacts. They've all reshared it. And now everybody believes that I'm the new dean of this business school. So now imagine if this was a connected network where when that kind of a proposition came through, there was a notification back to the school that said, hey, can you please verify that actually Dan is the new dean before we accept this and post it publicly in the world that Dan is the new dean? I was getting so many likes. I think it was the highest post I've ever had in my entire LinkedIn history. I think I was hitting something like 18,000 likes in a matter of days. And I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. Everybody thinks I'm a dean now. But it wasn't true. And the reality is I had to go back and retract my statement as a haha, by the way, guys, this is what blockchain can do. So it was great. But at the same time, if I was the post secretary, I would have been really scared about everybody contacting me to say, what do you mean? What happened to this dean? Did he get fired? Is he going to show up to work tomorrow? So it's the new world we're living in.
So, Trish, I would say that the future isn't what it used to be. Damn quail. I think what Dan and I are sharing is the need for us to stop for a minute and look at the way in which our current information systems thinking and behaviors and the risks of those systems, how they're going to make innovation possible, how they're going to improve security, how they're going to improve our relationship with our customers, our students, and enable us to do more with them to meet the needs that they have, not just whilst they're studying with us right now, but across their lifetime learning journey. And you at Contact North see students at every stage of their lives saying, I need new skills, I need new things, but I need it now. Sorry, I can't do that. It's more than my job's worth to let you into this course because it only has 3 start dates a year. Why don't we have 365 start dates? And that's what we're trying to do in New Zealand with a whole raft of skills-based courses to make them available on demand and to have modular, stackable learning. And to do that, we had to blow up the information system and reimagine it. And the reimagining was around blockchain as part of that solution. So I think there's some big opportunities to think differently, but we need courage and conviction to make it happen, and we need skills. So, there's a great opportunity here for Canada to show some leadership. We have some terrific blockchain expertise across the country. Dan's the leading guy in this part of the world. But I think we need to leverage that expertise to say, okay, I'm ready to reimagine my university or college, and I want to do it in my lifetime.
And Dan, what do you see as the future economies with this? Like, I know that you've talked about the fact that you can build that awareness. You've already had one success, so you build that model to show the next. What's your next steps with this? How do you get it across Canada for that way?
Trish, that's a really good question. And to be honest with you, I believe that I'm going to say this, and I'm not light at saying this, but I do believe that what the Canadian government is doing with the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, which is dictating the future state of credentials, credential management, personal information management, and how are you recognized as an individual is going to be game changing. And we're going to find ourselves again in a situation where technology leads process, and process will not be able to deploy itself fast enough and change fast enough, including internal policies, to catch up with what's becoming law. And we saw this very well happen in Europe, right, with the GDPR launch. GDPR was, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you told me these stats, right? GDPR was what, 9 years in the making with 100 plus different reiterations of it before it became live and everybody was shell-shocked? Like, how can you be shell-shocked? This has been presented to you for 10 years. It's happening.
Yeah.
So it's incredible because we're about to hit that same wall again. And that wall is things are happening behind the scenes. We're being drawn into policy for how we're going to manage people's personal information by the Canadian government. And I really want to know how many universities and post-secondary colleges or even student record management systems are currently starting to realign themselves to that framework. Right? I can bet that maybe 5% are even aware of what this is and what it's going to do. Now, interestingly enough, when we talk about the deployment of technology and when I talk about blockchain as a technology, people always assume that you have to build net new. You don't. There's ways in which you can actually bolt on to existing legacy systems and allow those to be enabled with blockchain capabilities that give them the opportunity to maintain student record management systems and everything about the student, including their payment, their credit card, first name, last name, phone number, which is pretty much identity theft, technically, if somebody penetrates it. So how do I allow that to happen using the encryptions and the methodologies that a private blockchain gives? And all you have to do is do a bolt-on. You don't have to rewrite the system. You don't have to get a new Unit 4. You can just bolt it on, create the encryptions right from the get-go, and allow for this to be an encrypted modeled technology that lives behind the scenes. And that is not as expensive as building net new, implementing, finding the resources, and so on and so forth. So from a future state, Trish, I mean, it's happening. Like, this is no longer a conversation. This is physically about to be deployed, and we just need to know how to adopt and ingest it and push it back out as something that formally we can stand behind as post-secondaries.
But it seems to me that awareness is really important too, though. It seems to me that you're seeing different examples. And as you're talking about, it's not the major makeover that you think it would be with the really high cost. So it's more about you letting institutions know that we get that you have this and we get you can't do it all, but it's about building that model that can do that. And how do you do that, Dan? How do you get in front and I guess some examples and some, successes to be able to showcase that? It's so important.
You know what, Trish? I really have to give it to Bow Valley College. They've been absolutely exceptional at seeing the future, coming in ahead of time and saying we have a split, right, where we have online and students that are coming in from abroad versus local students that are physically coming into the classrooms. And if it wasn't for Laura Jo Gunter and for Mishak Moabi to go in and say, hey, there's a new way for us to look at business, and they future stated it, right? They looked out 3, 4, 5 years and said, what should we look like in 5 years from now? And let's work backwards from there. And then we had Charles from the registrar system come in and say, hey, you know what? As a registrar, I believe that there's a new way to manage this process.
Wow.
And then it was incredible actually how the technology team internally, led by their and I believe they have their first CTO, out of all the post-secondaries, they came in and they said, we believe in technology evolution to move this. And I'd say that if I looked at the overall elapsed time, we're talking about months, not years, we're talking about months to be able to put something this significant and transformational in place. And I'm not going to quote dollars, but it was nowhere near what anybody's imagined. Nowhere near. And it's transformational.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bow Valley would be one of the places. The other one I'd draw your attention to is Wolf University, which was created by some professors at Oxford who were constantly annoyed by how much of the administrative work they had to do as professors that took them away from teaching. And they said, there's got to be a smarter way of running a university than this. So they created one, and it's called Wolf University, and it has two big components. One is teaching using Zoom in small group classes using the Oxford tutorial method, and all of the administration is done through blockchain technologies. And what they've discovered is two things. One is it frees up a heck of a lot of resources for a thing that's called teaching and learning, which kind of like is what the university is for. And the other thing they've discovered is actually it's not only more secure, it's more efficient. And so they've lowered their administrative costs, which are the fastest growing cost in the university and college sector. And they've increased their contact time and intensity of teaching and learning because blockchain has enabled them to do that. So Bow Valley College, Wolf University, the Open Universities team in the UK using blockchain and analytics to actually better improve course design, student services, student record keeping, the integrity of the student passport for learning, all examples in action. So it's not as if we're talking science fiction here, we're talking science fact, but we need more stories and we need them to be Canadian.
Stephen, I'm going to invite Farwar to come to the stage to see if there's questions, and she'll go through that. But before, as she is coming up, how does this impact with more movement online? We know that there's privacy issues, things like that. So why, because things are moving online faster, why is this more important, more urgent?
Well, in part because there's more data for us to play with and lose. And so I'm amazed how little use is being made of the analytics available to us about student learning, student support requests, student activity, but also how little we're making use of student performance and achievement. I taught last week, I had every single student had at least 9 artifacts, which are sitting right now in a learning management system, which will disappear at the end of the month. And I'm saying, what? So I created learning passports for everybody so that they have a record of everything they achieved, together with feedback from the profs and some community members who were involved. And in Dan's example, that would be a permanent record until one of us chose to revoke it.
Right.
And so, you know, we're missing opportunities to leverage assets, to leverage learning, to improve the experience of that learning by not using these information bits intelligently and by not having smart systems like blockchain.
Dan, did you want to comment on that before we get to questions?
No, I think Stephen captured it incredibly well. Absolutely.
Farwa, do we have questions that we can answer?
So we do have a few questions that have come in. Thank you so much for, shedding some light on some amazing points. We have about 12 minutes, so we can get to a few questions. I'll put them out for you, and then you can just choose who you'd like to direct it to right after. So my first question for you is, what is the role of blockchain in validating certifications?
Okay. Dan or Stephen?
Dan.
Dan?
Yep. So, so the role of blockchain is to create an immutable transactional record that's timestamped and tamper-proofed, that at that point in time, this individual is agreed on by all parties, meaning the school and the faculty, that they've completed successfully that course, and however that the grade goes through, or whichever way it is. But it's also about the defining of the skills and the description of the attributes of what that individual should have learned or left with when they completed that course. Now, creating a transaction ID like this in a private network is incredibly valuable because the one feature that most people don't really recognize about blockchain is that it's considered an append-only technology, because the current database structure and systems, the way that they're built, the functionality of delete no longer exists. Hence, that's why it becomes append-only. Therefore, once the record is issued and managed by all parties and everybody has access to it, it becomes irrefutable.
Dan. My next question is, are there any standards on data retention and storage for academic records?
Stephen, would you like to take that one? No?
They vary. I mean, part of the records have to be maintained for tax reasons. So there's a 7-year requirement on the financial transactions on all parties' side. And then parts of the academic record are maintained in perpetuity. So, for example, if you wanted to find out, did I really get a degree from the University of Wales in 1066? Sorry, 1990, just felt that long ago. In 1972, you could go find out, did I get an honorary doctorate from Athabasca University in the year 2000? You could go to the records of the university and see, even 100 years from now, that yes, I did. So some of them are short-term, some of them are like specific grades for specific assignments in a specific course. Who cares? So there is a record of that, but once you get the degree, we're kind of not that bothered. So it varies by what the information is and what its purpose is, but outcomes, big outcomes like degrees, diplomas, certificates are kept in perpetuity. Tax records, tax-related financial stuff for 7 years. Other records vary by, so for example, some of the examples I have in my course will disappear at the end of the month, but the registrar's office will be able to keep the grades for about a year until everybody's graduated, and then it all kind of disappears.
Dan, did you want to mention anything on that?
No, because that is really Stephen's area.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm good.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. And the last question I have for you is, are you seeing more insider threats emerge in the post-secondary sector?
Both can answer that one.
All right. Yeah. Dan, do you want to say something, and I'll add some examples?
Yeah, so I'll say it's definitely on the rise, and it's on the rise. It's not going down. It's not going away. And we're ultimately making it easier every day for those that want to go in and have a cyber attack. Because the one thing that we're not recognizing is technology moves very fast outside of the legacy systems that we've deployed. And if our legacy systems cannot keep up with the evolution of technology, we'll never keep up with the amount of net new pen tests and everything else that can be thrown at us on a regular basis. And, Dr. Stevens' earlier example of, what was it, in 2 hours, 50 points?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
there was a recent internal event at a university not a million miles from my home where 300 computers were deliberately set up with some inappropriate software to capture student information and student data as they were registering for courses. And that was internal. So I think the internal threats are growing, especially in this time when there's so much job insecurity in higher education. I live here in Alberta. We've had 11% cuts in post-secondary education with more to come. So people looking at their uncertain futures are willing to take more risks than if they had a certain future. There are lots of examples of internal fraud that uses data information. One of them was from the number 2 CTO, Deputy Chief Technology Officer in a large public institution in the United States, who was ripping off 1 penny for every $100 of transaction over a 21-year period.
Wow.
Yeah, he's probably a major Trump donor or something now.
Any other questions, Farwa?
Those are all of the questions that we have for today. Thank you so much for being a part of siberXchange. At this time, I'd like to pass it back to Trish for some closing remarks that you might have.
Thank you very much. I just have 2 closing remarks. One, it was so amazing to be here. siberX team is incredible. This setup is so cool. It was just such a pleasure. And Dan and Stephen, oh my gosh, it's so great to work with you guys. I would like you to leave everybody with 2 points about everything we talked about. What are 2 significant things that we need to know to move forward in regards to information, lean information, and blockchain technology and how we can change that? I know that's a big ask, so you get 2. So we'll start with you.
Okay, so my first point would be the future isn't a straight line from the past. As Dan said, there's some disruption coming, not just from COVID-19 and all the stuff that's going on, but from new legislation, new ways of thinking. Second thing, if we don't do something like this, then somebody will come along and do it for us and take our lunch. And that will be a new competitor for these post-secondary students who are in a market for learning. So it's not as if, we have a God-given right to offer learning and people have to come. We're in a market now where student fees are so high, they're shopping for options. And if we don't start smartening up in some of these ways that we've been talking about, somebody else will come and do it for us. So 2 observations. Future isn't a straight line from the past. Get ready for more disruption.
Thank you, Stephen. Dan?
And well, those are phenomenal and very on point. And the only thing I can compliment with is we have to step away from thinking that technology is expensive, because it really isn't. It's getting cheaper to deploy by the day. And 2, there are new evolving business models that get created by deploying emerging technology that, as far as I'm aware, every single one of them that I've seen so far from our deployments in the blockchain space have all resulted either in immediate cost savings or instant cost avoidances. And we need to be able to look at both and understand that they're here and they're real. And it's just about wanting to accept that they actually are real. So for me, that's where I'll leave it.
Okay.
And this was phenomenal. So thank you, Trish, for having us here. And
thanks, Trish.
Thank you so much. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. I think we're done our session. And just such a pleasure working with you guys today and great thoughts to take away. Thank you very much.
Phenomenal. Happy weekend.
You too.